Welcome back to SaaS Connect Online. I'm Andrew Porter. I'm with Pariveda, and I'm delighted to be your host today on the SaaS Connect One-on-One podcast. Today, I've invited Sophie Zugnoni, who is the head of business development, cloud business development at Hazelcast. We're here today to talk about tips and strategies for partnering with cloud providers. Just a reminder, we try to get to your questions, throughout this talk. So please fire away in the chat section below. One more bit of housekeeping before we get started here is, please, if you have not already, check out Cloud Software Association at cloudsoftwareassociation.com. Join their free Slack community with over 3,000 partnership pros like Sophie and myself. And also, don't forget to register for the upcoming SaaS Connect conference coming up April 19th and 20th in San Francisco. Speaking of San Francisco, Sophie, that's your hometown. Welcome. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me. So I'm Sophie Zugnoni. I've been working in the SaaS space for almost 10 years. Actually, before that, I used to work with Andrew at Pariveda Solutions. And then after that, I've transitioned into working at ISVs. So you'll be hearing that perspective on my side. So I've worked at Snowflake, Equinix, TigerCraft, and I'm now at Hazelcast.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, and one other, sort of fun tidbit is that, Sophie and I did work together at Pariveda. She was actually the very first external hire in partnerships at Pariveda way back in 2017. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things that we'll be able to talk through today, crossing over from that SI and consulting side, which is where Pariveda is, as well as where you've landed within the ISV and technology space. Before we really dig into the world of cloud partnerships, though, maybe Sophie, I'm always curious because, I've had an interesting journey getting into the world of partnerships. How did you land in this space as well? We don't exactly graduate from college with a degree in alliance or partnership management.
That's a great question. So I actually started my career as a high school teacher. I used to teach French in high school. And then I transitioned into the technology space, first in the world of project management, working for a company that was a reseller. So reselling Dell, Cisco, HPE, and then there was a services side where they needed project management. And then I moved on into the cloud space when cloud was still just beginning about 10 years ago, when one of the smaller resellers out there wanted to build a cloud practice. So when I started that role, it actually became more of a product manager role, building solutions, building a product for a company. But because it was a cloud product, that needed some cloud/alliance management there. And that's how I really accidentally found that field, because like you said, we don't graduate from college thinking that we're going to go into partnerships. What about you, Andrew? Because I know when we started working together, you were an engineering manager. So how did you pivot from being an engineering manager into a purely partnership role?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I came at it, like you mentioned, from the computer science side. So I was, I grew up as a developer in the data warehouse space and in the application development space. As time moved on, I started to sort of realize that the projects that we were building for customers were so heavily involved in, with companies like Microsoft and AWS. And, I had that sort of natural curiosity to figure out, what is it like on the business side? And so when I sort of raised my head up a little bit, realized that there's a ton of really interesting collaboration going on, with partnerships, with clients and with the cloud providers as well. So, it's super interesting. I'd love to hear, even frankly, from the folks in the chat, if you're willing to share, how did you get your start in partnerships? Because I think that there's got to be so many interesting stories there. Awesome. Well, let's jump in. So, Sophie, I know you've been doing this for the better half of 10 years, but, thinking back, and also, through the perspective of the folks we have on the call, what are some of the first things that you would recommend doing as a new alliances manager? How would you go ahead and formulate your strategy? Because I think, to your point earlier, a lot of people, may think of alliances managers and partnerships as, we're really scheduling events and we're going to happy hours and we're schmoozing, but I think that there's a lot more there. So, what would you recommend there?
That is so funny. Somebody actually actually asked me that question. It's like, is that what you guys do in partnership? You just go to happy hours and then smile and then drink
I'm
and
not
then
complaining, but
So it's a lot more than that. So I actually it's a great question because I'm actually started in new role at Hazelcast. So just like any new role, you come in and you start assessing where the lay of the land. So I would approach that with say 3 or 4 different angles. So the first one, I would say, where is the company in terms of readiness to co-sell? So and co-selling itself is a huge topic on its own. But so align that with the strategy. So what does your pipeline look like? What is your where do you need to get to in terms of revenue? What percentage of that revenue would you account that to direct versus a partnership? And then on the ISV side, in addition to co-selling, you also have to look at products. So if you think about the technology space, what is the better together story? What's in it for the ISV to partner? What's in it for the CSP? And how can you have a joint messaging that ultimately helps the customer? Because at the end of the day, we are here to help our customers. So what does that message look like? And then what are the opportunities to really deeply integrate the product line as natively as possible, and then build that partnership? Because again, depending on the space you're in, whether you're in data analytics or security or whatnot, you'll have to analyze what that is that you can integrate in terms of product. And then in terms of marketing, there are also opportunities to co-market. And then so that's kind of part of your overall go-to-market strategy, but also look at what you can realistically do. And then the last angle I would say would be alignment with the entire organization, because you can't go alone, right? So you've got to have alignment with your executives. A lot of that also involves some educating, because not everybody knows what partnership says. So your role is really constantly educating the leadership, the sales team, and everybody else around you about what it is that you need to accomplish to reach the goals. But also to set that alignment, that you also need resources. Do you need do you have a partner sales engineer supporting you? Do you have a partner marketing person, and so on? And
really
finally, actually, another topic also is looking at the readiness of the PartnerOps group, because all of this would need to be tracked in terms of PartnerOps. Because when you think about co-selling, there are incentives in place, right? There are incentives attached to marketplace deals, there are incentives attached to co-selling, spiffs or whatnot, and all of that needs to be measured.
Yeah, that's awesome. And let's unpack all of that. I would also say that from my experience working, with CSPs like AWS, AWS, Microsoft, and GCP, that there's definitely a fundamental there that below even the strategy, and to your point, which is they have so much structure already in place, and you sort of have to, one, recognize that, right? So there's all these tierings. If you're familiar with the Microsoft landscape, they've recently moved away from sort of what we call precious metals, silver, gold specialization. But AWS has their competency programs, what we would call maybe a differentiation program, as well as, other co-investment vehicles as well. A lot of what I had to do early on is, sort of recognizing where is there saturation, right? So we're in consulting and data and analytics. Where could we find our niche? And, because it's just so broad, right? The Microsoft partner ecosystem has something like 640,000 plus partners registered. I mean, that's massive. AWS has something like 100,000 is what they announced at reInvent. So it's really navigating those partner programs as well. And then to your point, defining your strategy there. So there's a little bit of research that you have to do as well. But yeah, Sophie, let's unpack that stuff.
Right.
So,
and I just
yeah, go ahead.
On the SI side, it's the same thing, right? Whether I remember when I started Pariveda, we were just a partner, and then we had to move up to advanced consulting partner, and then premier consulting partner, and so on. getting the certifications needed. So yes, just that programmatic aspect, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely a growth curve there where, like when you were the first external hire to come in and launch this thing, we've since scaled to where we have full-time partner operations managers. We have partner marketing dotted lines over the marketing team. We've got content writers. It becomes this full-fledged program, that you have to sort of navigate through. So,
And then
but
I also like,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, go ahead.
I also like to see where Pariveda is today, because back then we started with AWS, some Microsoft, some GCP, but now you've got, I saw on social media, on LinkedIn, all of the certifications you got in healthcare with Azure and so on. So it has grown quite a bit. So congratulations to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. And each of them have a different strategy, right? Like they may all be CSPs, but they all operate very, very differently in terms of, to your point, incentives, understanding the roles, and like what an account team even looks like. And I think we can dig into that here in a second. But what does that core account team even look like? Who should you prioritize? What roles? How do you message it? It's all very nuanced. So, but I think let's dig into co-selling here for a second, right? So it's working, early in the sales cycle with those account teams, which I can say is absolutely critical for us as a systems integrator, as a consulting partner, where really we're focused on an alignment matrix where, there's so many different roles. You've got specialist orgs, you've got account teams, solution architects, all that type of thing, where we're constantly sort of juggling that. How do you go about co-selling with an ISV? Sophie.
So again, co-selling is a very big topic. So so depending on the technology, the ISV, and so I would start with pipeline. So you look at your pipeline, you understand, and then also your existing case studies. So for instance, if your solution works great in financial services or in retail or whatever specific segment, if you're selling to the line of business versus if you're selling to the infrastructure side, you've got to narrow that down and make it very, very simple. So if you think about the AEs at the CSP side, you've got, like you mentioned, thousands of ISVs out there and SIs. So you really, really need to simplify it for them, that the joint messaging is we work better together if we target these specific accounts and this specific use case, and this is how we win together. So, and then there's also a lot of give and take in the beginning. When you just started, no one has heard about you, so there's a lot of giving in the sense that you start engaging into the account, you work with the AE, and then you basically develop that relationship. At the end of the day, they don't know you. So and then in terms of developing trust, it's really doing what you say that you're going to be doing, right? So if you're early in an account and then you speak with the AE, you tell them that here's where you are, here are the buyers, here's your strategy, here's the sales cycle, this is the license amount, whatnot. And then as it progresses, keep them up to date. And at the end of the day, you might feel like, oh, I did all of the work. They didn't really do anything. But again, you're still building that branding and that relationship. There will be opportunities for expansion, but this is where also you navigate, right? So once you get that win, then you expand into additional accounts, and on the leadership side, right? You meet with sales leaders, industry leads, and whatnot, and then. And it's really a game of expansion.
Yeah. And I think, a great story was how you went, your first role at Pariveda was going after machine learning. I don't know if you want to touch on that at all, but that seemed like a perfect example.
Yes, I can talk about that. So back in the early days of cloud, everybody, because there are trends, there are industry trends. And in the early days of cloud adoption, you hear about migration, you hear about workload migration. Let's migrate everything from your data center into the cloud. And you hear about lift and shift or versus refactoring and all of that. And then at that time, what was really hot was the DevOps space. And so if you're a services company and you've got DevOps engineers and you're going to modernize, and transform the organization, you hear buzzwords like digital transformation and so on, right? So those were the early days. And then as cloud computing evolves and now I'm moving to the data space, as enterprises are capturing enormous amount of data and compute is cheap, storage is cheap. If you think about machine learning, it's been around since the 1950s. You had mathematicians back then, right, with all those algorithms. But why did machine learning only started to get really, really hot in the last 5 years is really thanks to the advance of cloud computing, right, that allows that to happen. So then you have all of these ISVs in the data analytics space that just popped, right, and thrive, like the Snowflake of the world and Databricks or whatnot. So for me, it was kind of capitalizing that trend. At that time, Amazon, AWS had just started a machine learning competency. Again, it's tied. Before that, you had the DevOps competency, you had security, you had migration competency. Machine learning was just new. So Pariveda, being such an awesome consulting company working with enterprises working on cutting edge technology, Pariveda had those wonderful stories, right? And had the skill set to work onto what, we used to call the unknown, right? So specifically in machine learning, that was the opportunity to strategize. And back then, we at Pariveda, we deployed 2 SageMaker, that's AWS's machine learning platform, into production before SageMaker even GA'd. So you can imagine the traction that we got with working directly with the VP of AI back then, right? And then building a sales campaign with the support of the VP of AI and a few industry leads, build a campaign on how to win more stories like that.
I love that story. Yeah. And it speaks to your strategy for going after the unmet needs, within AWS and figuring out where they're investing and how to plug in there, to bring value to customers and and our cloud providers as well. So love it. The only other thing, and then I'd say let's move on to should we talk about marketplaces? The only other thing that came to mind in what you were talking through is, you mentioned meeting the needs and alignment with our cloud, with those individuals within our cloud providers. What I reflected on recently is how we've gone about structuring our internal alignment, the roles and the responsibilities, who works with our partners. What we found lately is that, I notice a pattern where, you'll create a partner sales manager regionally and sort of put one in the East, one in the West, one in the Central. But I'm actually a big firm believer lately that there's a lot of resiliency to come out of baking those accountabilities into existing roles, into existing account management roles, CSM roles and solution architecture roles, sort of teaching them to work, more effectively instead of adding another layer, because, then you sort of have a little bit more, resiliency there. So
I like that perspective, Andrew. I think it depends on the size of the company, right? So if you're a really, really big ISVs, you're going to need folks that are very dedicated, more than one. You might need 20 partner sales engineers, whatnot, by region and even by specializations or whatnot. But I would say for a smaller startup, really everybody needs to be vested into the success of the partnership. So if you're a sales engineer and you're working an account and you meet with, let's say, your AWS counterpart, you need to think about the partnership side on how could I maybe co-author a blog with this person on this customer success, on a customer success story, right? So a alliance manager can only do so much, right? But then you need those relationship building at different angles, the AE side,
absolutely,
the sales engineering side, so sales engineering with the solutions architect, right? And customer engineer, right? They all have different titles, but you get the idea. So So, and then those have different hierarchies too. So as you build those relationships, you're looking for opportunities to come in and pitch and have sales enablement sessions at their weekly meeting or monthly meeting or town hall meeting or whatever that is. So you've got to build those relationships at many levels. And then, so you've got the I call it the bottom up and then also the top down approach, right? So the top down approach, you've also need to get the executive alignments on your VP of sales meeting with sales lead at cloud provider or whatnot, right? So you kind of have all of those relationships and checkpoints established.
Yeah, no doubt. The more touch points you have with the different roles, the better, and the more effective your cloud strategy will be.
So you're talking
Awesome.
about marketplace. Shall we cover that? So
yeah, let's jump in. Go for it.
And I only learned recently from you that on the consulting side that you can also list a offering on the cloud marketplace. So for those of you who don't know what the cloud marketplaces are, you basically, as an ISV or a consulting company, you can list a offering on the marketplace, and the customer can buy that directly from the marketplace using and bidding would basically be done by the cloud provider. And then in the back end, they would pay you back minus some small percentage of revenue share, right? And that depends for each cloud provider. The benefit for the customer is that they don't have to handle another actual benefit for both, right? Is that procurement is done with the cloud provider, but they can also burn down their commit. So a lot of customers out there have a huge commit or some commit with the cloud provider. So when they buy any product in the marketplace from the ISV, they can burn down that commit. So we want to be able to leverage that. Somebody I met before said, "Oh, it's free money." I mean, I kind of like that term. So it's essentially free money in the sense that the customer has, a budget that they can use to fund that. And then on the procurement side, it's very easy because you don't have to set up, legal and contract and all that. It's all click through and it's done very quickly. So marketplace is huge because it's a key strategic initiative of all of the CSPs, and in fact, they have dedicated folks on the marketplace sides to work with you to drive those sales. The AEs get to burn down their quota, so we're all incentivized to drive those marketplace sale. So, but that said, it also has a heavy component in terms of the operation side. So this is why I mentioned, earlier that when you're working with ISV, assess the maturity of the operations, because if you're an ISV and you sell software, it's all consumption based. So that consumption would need to be measured. That reporting needs to get back to the cloud provider so that they know how much to bill the customer. And then your contract also depends. Some have 1-year contract, 3-year contracts, renewals. So if you think about all of those details, you can see how important your cloud operations person is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I can say that from the SI side, I've been pleasantly surprised with how effective Marketplace has been to sort of streamline that deal flow, to your point. I wouldn't say that it's something we've led with yet. It feels like we're getting there. But there are definitely instances where, instead of having to get an MSA signed with a client, we were able to go through the marketplace because, to your point, they've got an EA signed with AWS or with Microsoft, and it just enables you to get in the door, and you've got more people, within AWS, to your point, compensated to help get this deal done because, their quota's on the line, their commission's on the line as well.
Right.
It has been, like I said, a little bit more opportunistic. It actually does more to bring the partnership together than it does for the customer already has that relationship with with the cloud providers. So yeah, go ahead.
I also want to add that just because you have your listing on the marketplace doesn't mean that the lead will come in automatically. So think of it as more as a tool to enable you to close sales faster and easier, but you still need to build your go-to-market motion. That whole core setting that we discussed earlier, you still have to build that play and just leverage marketplace as a tool. Just because you have it listed doesn't mean that they will come in automatically.
Yep.
And this is where I also want to add, if you think about partnership at scale, then this is where as you grow that partnership, how much the CSPAEs are incentivized, those are all negotiable depending on where you are of that partnership. So when you have all of that lined up, you've got even your own AEs in your own organization. How are you incentivizing your own AEs to transact via the marketplace? So you kind of have to have that strategy aligned also.
Yeah. How do you even track all of that? Is there anything you'd recommend in terms of, sales operations?
There are third-party companies out there like tackle.io, tackle.io that can help with managing listings and so on. But at the end of the day, for us, everybody's using SFTC, right? To really have a central point for all of that and working closely with your cloud engineering team to track consumption and your sales ops team.
Sophie, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how about product integration. Do you want to share, what are your thoughts there? When we're building solutions with, as a consulting partner, right? We're on that design and build phase. We hand it off, the design, build, run. The run will typically hand off to a customer. We're often taking different Lego blocks off the table, whether that's Microsoft, GCP, AWS, and stitching them together. Product integration, from a SaaS perspective, is a lot different. So let's talk about that a little bit.
So this, the answer is going to depend on the technology stack that you're setting. But if I'm going to give the example of data analytics, where if you look at the entire data pipeline, you've got the ingestion tools out there into a data warehouse, and every single cloud provider has a data warehouse. And then you look at the BI tools or AI/ML, as an application leveraging the data and the data warehouse. So depending on what technology your company is building, you need to think about how, for example, let's talk about Google and BigQuery, for example. So if your better together story is to enable Google BigQuery to grow for the customer because you're ingesting data into BigQuery, then how do you make that as smooth as possible? So whether you're building connectors, that's one. So that's on the data flow itself. But then think about a partnership where you think about how your company can be discovered. So if you can get to a point where Google is willing to have your product listed and discoverable, so I use the word discoverability. So if your product can be discovered from the Google Cloud Console directly, then that's a big win, right? And whether the sales happens through marketplace or whatnot, that's just again, marketplace is just an avenue, right, for procurement. But if it can be discovered from the console, then you've got a tighter, a stronger partnership there, right? So that's just an example. And then along with that, opportunities to write joint blogs together, white paper, and whatnot. So that's another opportunity to co-market and get your brand out there, not just to the world, to customers, but also to help you with your partnership, so that your Google AEs or whatnot see, right, that not just that noise, but the brand that you've built a deeper integration, and that you've been able to help X customer with solving a specific solution.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Are there any other specific metrics that come to mind for measuring, how effective or, those product integrations are. For example, I know that there's a lot of roles out there, within Google and AWS and Microsoft, in a business development role, maybe attached to, Microsoft Azure, functions or something like that. And if you were to build a product integration with Hazelcast or, something like that, is there a metric that you sort of anchored on there?
ISV, consumption is the biggest metric. So,
Okay.
so you can look at adoption, but you can also look at consumption.
We've primarily been mentioning the 3 public cloud providers for cloud and workload provisions. Other than the available initial landing footprint, public cloud is starting to become less special, more commoditized in terms of the services offered. Instead of sorting through tens of thousands of partner programs of these big cloud providers, what are the core partnership metrics that you would say 80% of the MSPs or ISVs would love in a cloud infrastructure provider?
So my answer to that is yes, it is a very crowded space. And yes, you can think of any technology product that you can come up with. The cloud provider already has a version of it, right? So you have to think about your differentiator. So how you're different, be very crystal clear about that. And at the end of the day, there are so many accounts out there. Like it's almost, there are so many, the market is so huge that as an ISV or a SI, you're working directly with a specific line of business, or your solution or your product is providing value to that customer, right? So from that perspective alone, there is going to be some desire from the CSP to partner with you, because again, it's all going back to, as long as you provide value to customer, you can be very specific what that is and how it differentiates from the CSP. That's you're going to be able to partner, right? So differentiator, bringing value, and really also being willing to do the hard work, right? So those I would say will be the main takeaway. So differentiate, do the hard work,
Yeah.
and be specific on the value that you provide to the line of business.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that, Sophie. And also, Yuri, to your question, I see the same thing, right? There are so many different programs out there that are big and small, right? There's things as big as like AWS Map or Microsoft AMP, and then there's little things like little POCs and funding buckets. Some of them have great access to customers, and others are trying to generate referrals out of partners. And neither is wrong. It's just there's different levers you can pull. The suggestion I would offer is create your own business case that aligns to your existing company and bring that to the partner and say, this is our opportunity on the table. Is there somebody within a BD group at, Google Cloud that is willing to invest here? This is what we're bringing to the table. I mean, just being proactive and creative in finding that niche, and because they're always looking for new ideas. So, and then you've totally owned the end-to-end process, right? If you're creating a business case and a target market and a set of accounts that you want to go after together, like you're making their job easy, and it makes them so much easier. It makes it so much easier for them to bring money to the table for you, right? So go ahead, Sophie.
I love Ivan's answer. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, so
I have not.
Give an example of how he was able to do just that and use those relationships, turn those into case studies, those success stories, and then that drove new business.
Should we wrap this up, Sophie, with talking a little bit about executive alignment and what that looks like for you?
Yes.
Is it, leading ISV cloud partnerships?
Sure. I covered that a little bit earlier, that you really need a team to help you succeed. You can't go alone. So in your organization, make sure that your sales leads are aligned with the mission. Be direct with them on what that looks like. So it's a long game. First, set the expectation. but also be clear in terms of if we do X, Y, Z and we reach these milestones, this is what you're going to get. This is what you're going to see. And then I got the advice from somebody else about documenting everything. I think I love the advice because it seems that on the outside, right, what they see us doing is just running a whole bunch of meetings, and because the long game, it always seems like, okay, where's the impact? Where are we? What has are they just attending meetings and then there's nothing that came out of that, right? So documenting your strategy, setting expectations on what you need, and alignment on what milestones you'll be able to accomplish based on the resources that you have is very important. But and that also requires not just conversation, but educating, right? Because a lot of people still don't know how it's done, right? Like everybody hears about, wonderful, success stories of, say, MongoDB and Google Cloud, or Palo Alto Networks being partner of the year, so all that sounds amazing, but what does it take to get there? To be sure, not only to document that, but to be constantly aligned, like every month, every 2 months, and so on.
Yeah. And if you only have, to your point around educating, if you only have a quarterly touch point with the West region leadership, at Microsoft for, XYZ, that they're going to have tons of those meetings. And this is not unique to partnerships. It's a matter of condensing and consolidating the messaging. But also understanding how those reports are cut, right? It's so important. Organizations are constantly changing, what their structures look like, who creates the reports, what tooling, what metrics, trying to find that competitive advantage. But understanding, it's as simple as understanding how the reports are going to be cut. When are they going to be cut? Did you do your nuts and bolts around attribution correctly with their partner portals? All of those fundamentals are can make or break it. How did they change the segmentation? Right. One of the things we've been, challenged with is understanding how, they're breaking off industry business units. Commercial and enterprise, like really, what do your executives even care about? Because there could be a gap there in terms of where you think you're proving value to them, but, maybe something switched, underneath the hood. So, and that's kind of my thoughts there. Yeah, go ahead.
Also want to add in terms of executive alignment, also have that strategic alignment with your CSP. So have a QBR with your CSP.
Right.
See how not just how you're doing, but if they're also putting their part of the bargain, right? And if it comes to a point where you're having a hard conversation with your cloud provider, that they say, okay, this is great, but let's just meet in the field. We're not really going to do anything strategic with you. Then in a way, as a partner, you also need to be agile and maybe make the decision that maybe I should spend more time with another CSP and not this one, right? So know that there are 3 major cloud providers out there, right? Not just one, and competition is a good thing. So the general guideline is follow where your market is. I forgot to mention competition, right? Like where the competition is, but that's another topic on its own, right? Where you can strategic align, say with Google, because they might not have a product line that's competing with you or whatnot, right? Or if it's more complementary with Azure or whatnot, right? So you've got to think about all of that and be ready to pivot if the partnership is not going the way you want it to go.
All right. I think we're nearing the end here, Sophie. Is there anything else we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk through in terms of, working with the cloud providers? And then also, folks on the line still, please do drop in any last questions you have. We'd love to answer them.
I would say it's a really, really big topic. Yes. And we've covered so many very quickly, right, at the high level. So the big picture is there. Sometimes the how can be even more difficult, right? As you navigate, you just have to go out there and see how it goes. But feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect, and it's a very small world, and happy to collaborate and help those of you who are new in the space.
Starting a new partner program for a SaaS has been exciting. We now have key partners aligning with us, but would like to measure success together. Any ideas apart from new business? Sophie, any thoughts there?
On the SaaS side, I really like to take it from a product angle, because you're really marrying two products together, and the two products together become a solution, right? So I would look into the metrics on how do you measure the success of your product and adoption. So if that gets tied to revenue directly, then great, you can use revenue as a metric. But sometimes, especially in the SaaS space, if your product is still early and you had just built it, then revenue might not be a clear is not the best indicator, right? But more on product adoption.
Yeah.
So that's that. And what about on the SI side? Some organizations, I think, we measure in terms of like how many case studies did you publish, things like that, right?
That's exactly what I was going to ask, Sophie, is how do like those means-based activities like blog posts and webinars that you've run together, or accelerators that you've launched in the solution space or in the marketplace, right? Like how many of those, whatever the sort of department is that owns, whether that's marketing or something like that, ahead of revenue, to your point. From an SI perspective, net new logos are hard to come by. They take a lot of investment. So we often look at the health of our partnership in terms of, yes, it's touch points with individuals, right? Like, what does our relationship map look like? What is the trust? Who are, how many people are active within our communities? But from a revenue standpoint, it's about the growth within, within a given account. We're really anchored on, a couple dozen strategic accounts together, and looking at, what the growth looks like within those accounts together in terms of health of our partnership, which is kind of more of a customer success angle, I guess, is my point there.
Right. There's a question about pointers for account mapping with SaaS companies or agencies. It seems to be different between SaaS and SaaS as compared to SaaS and agency. I actually don't know what they meant by agency versus SaaS.
Agency is more like a consulting or an SI partner, I would say, like services oriented versus subscription oriented. And Sophie, I'm probably speaking for you in the SaaS and ISV world, but the volumes of opportunities and of accounts is so much broader in that space. You have very rich startup, SMB, mid-market. There's a very formal sales structure where you've got, lots of, sales teams directly working there, and where account mapping, is a volume game as well. Within an agency, lots of agencies are pretty small, a couple people, a couple dozen people, right? Like think about an SI. So like not every company, agencies are expensive. So are SIs in that sense. And so I think that there's, the question around account mapping, yes, it absolutely happens. But account mapping within consulting and SI and agencies, it's a little bit more focused, is typically what I've noticed. There's only going to be a couple of, there's not that volume game. And so there is a little bit of a disconnect there. I don't know, Sophie, any thoughts there on account mapping between?
I actually don't believe that much in account mapping. Mm-hmm. I've gone through so many account mapping. I guess the odds of I would rather focus on the granularity versus, just dumping your SFTC, pipeline and then get another one and see where you could align. For me, it's more, and maybe because at the ISVs I've been working on, the solutions are very targeted by use case and then the specific buyer personas or whatnot. So we would actually start with a very smaller list of very large enterprises. versus going very horizontal. So I can understand if you're at the ISV where your product is very horizontal, that account mapping might work. But at the end of the day, somebody needs to put in the initial work, which is the pitching, right? And no one can do that
Trust,
better than yourself as an ISV.
Yeah.
So there is one last question about what's one key lesson you've learned that you wish you knew when you started? Do you want to answer first, Andrew? What did you wish you knew?
What's one thing I wish I knew when I started? I mean, for me, I don't come from a sales background or a marketing background. So I was learning this thing, the strategy, how a marketing organization, I mean, so much of the partnership is content creation, defining that joint value proposition that Sophie's talked about. So for me, it was a huge learning curve to really plug into, how that sales and marketing world works. I had tended to be focused on, the customer's business problem and the engineering, approach that we had to take to build it, with those Lego blocks. So yeah, for me, it was how that world works was a huge learning curve for me that I'm still, navigating today. So Sophie, what do you think?
So for me, in the early days, it felt that as a tiny ISV not tiny, but as an ISV or as a SI among hundreds of them, thousands of them, that it feels like you have no chance. And when you're working with PDM, it felt like you're just one of so many. I actually, throughout the years, took another perspective where they actually really, really want you to be successful. So if you engage with them in the perspective that really they wouldn't have a job if you didn't exist. Like if you, the partner, didn't exist, they wouldn't have a job. So if you think about that if you take that perspective, then you're going to see that you're going to want to think that they want to collaborate with you. And I think so. What I'm saying is a lot of blockers out there comes from ourselves. But if you set your mindset that it's going to be a great partnership and they're in there to succeed with you, as long as you're willing to put in the hard work, then it's going to be a great ride. And a lot of the people that you partner with actually end up being friends and whatnot, right? Throughout the years, because again, I feel that it's a very a small community, not where not a lot of people understand what we're doing, right? Or have an appreciation for it.
I think it's a really good point. It reminded me of a book I was reading. It's called The Death of Competition, and it's all about ecosystems. And, the argument is that, it's no longer business to business competition. It's ecosystem competition. And what that means is that for those cloud providers that are at the center of those ecosystems, they absolutely, to your point, need companies like Pariveda, companies like Hazelcast to buy in. They absolutely need, it's critical for them in order for them to succeed in their, in their world. So really great point.
Great. I love that you brought the word ecosystem, because I just realized you mentioned the word ecosystem this entire talk. And it is so critical, right? If you want to scale, you want to think big, and partnering with the cloud provider doesn't mean just partnering with the cloud provider, but also getting your reach to the hundreds of partners that they have in that ecosystem, right? So yeah, absolutely, it's an ecosystem play.
Yeah, we almost got away with not saying ecosystem about partnerships.
Well done there, Andrew.
Darn it. All right. Any last questions? Thank you. This is a really great conversation. So really appreciate you all sticking with us through. I didn't think we'd make it through the hour. So really great conversation.
All right. Thank you, Andrew.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Thanks for joining. Just a quick bit of housekeeping as we close this out. Again, don't forget to register for SaaS Connect, the conference coming up in April. I'll be there. So would love to see you all and meet you all. And, with that, again, Sophie, congrats on your new role, head of cloud business development at Hazelcast, and all the best. Thanks for sharing
Thank
your
you,
insights.
Andrew. And thanks everyone for joining us today.